You're in an argument. You're furious. Your hands are shaking. Your chest is tight. You have 17 perfectly logical points lined up, and you are ready. And then your eyes fill up with tears. Not now, please. Not now. But it's too late. Your voice cracks. The other person stares at you, and suddenly you're not defending yourself anymore. You're explaining why you're crying. You lost. Again, not because you were wrong, but because your body completely betrayed you. But here's what nobody told you about that moment, that response, that involuntary, humiliating, fury-triggered tear response. It's not a character flaw. It's not immaturity. It's not manipulation. It's your nervous system doing something extraordinarily specific. And once you understand why, you might never feel ashamed of it again. This happens to more people than you think. And it has a name. Well, several, depending on which researcher you ask. Elaine Aron, a psychologist at Stony Brook University, spent decades studying what she called sensory processing sensitivity, the trait that causes roughly 15 to 20% of the population to process emotional and sensory information more deeply than average. Her 1996 research identified these individuals, now commonly called highly sensitive people, as having a nervous system that doesn't just feel more, it floods more. Think of it as running emotional software that other people simply don't have installed. Meanwhile, stress researcher Ad Vingerhoutz found in 2013 that adult crying functions as an evolutionary release mechanism, the body's way of processing emotional overload before it becomes physiological damage. And Stephen Porges Theory explains why threat responses, including anger, can trigger a cascade through the autonomic nervous system that bypasses conscious control entirely. In short, your nervous system is not misfiring. It is responding exactly the way it was built to respond, just more intensely and more visibly than most people find socially convenient. Here's where it gets painful, because the problem isn't just internal. When you cry during anger, the people around you don't see anger. They see sadness or guilt, or, and this one stings manipulation. Paul Ekman's research on universal emotional expressions showed that humans are wired to decode facial expressions rapidly and instinctively. Tears read as grief, not fury. So you end up fighting two battles at once, the original argument and the misreading of your face. Marsha Linehan's work on emotional dysregulation describes this exact gap. The space between how intensely an emotion is felt and how accurately it gets expressed. For people who cry when angry, that gap is enormous. The internal experience is a 5-alarm fire. The external signal is a sad movie. And here's the cruelest part. Mirror neurons, the neural circuits that cause us to unconsciously mirror the emotions we observe in others, respond to what they see, not what you mean. Your opponent mirrors your apparent sadness. They soften, or worse, they become confused. The confrontation dissolves into reassurance. And the original issue, never resolved. You didn't just lose the argument, you lost the context of the argument. So what is actually happening inside that nervous system? Let's start with the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. Psychologist Daniel Goleman, in his landmark 1995 work on emotional intelligence, coined the term amygdala hijack to describe what happens when an emotional stimulus is so intense that the amygdala fires before the prefrontal cortex. The rationale, language-based, arguing properly part of your brain, can intervene. Your thinking brain gets locked out. Your feeling brain takes the wheel, and it drives straight into a tearful ditch. But here's the part that reframes everything. Biochemist William Frey's 1985 research on emotional tears found something remarkable. Emotional tears, unlike tears caused by, say, onions, contain measurable concentrations of stress hormones, specifically ACT and leucinenkephalin, chemicals produced during cortisol spikes and emotional flooding. When you cry, you are literally expelling stress chemistry from your body. Tears aren't a sign that you've lost control. They're a sign that your body is actively managing a chemical emergency. You're not falling apart. You're running biological damage control. Add to this the Yerkes-Dodson arousal curve, a 1908 discovery that remains one of the most replicated findings in psychology. When emotional arousal exceeds an optimal threshold, behavioral control deteriorates rapidly. For highly sensitive people, that threshold is lower. The curve peaks faster. and the descent into flooding tears, shaking. Voice cracks happens not because of weakness, but because of intensity of processing. Now here's where it gets interesting across generations. Gender socialization researcher Leslie Brody found in 1999 that boys are systematically trained to suppress tears, while girls are systematically trained to suppress anger. The result, decades later, is two different but equally dysregulated adult populations, one that slams doors and stonewalls, one that floods and cries. Different outputs. Same broken emotional pipeline. Nobody taught either group what to actually do with the feeling. They just got told which part to hide. And then there's alexithymia, a psychological term for the difficulty identifying and naming one's own emotions. Research suggests that when the mind can't find language for an emotional experience, the body finds its own language: trembling, tension, tears. The body expresses what the SIC cannot name. This is why emotional granularity matters so much. The more specific your emotional vocabulary, the difference between angry and betrayed, between frustrated and humiliated, the better your nervous system can route the signal appropriately. Meyer and Salavi's emotional intelligence framework, later expanded by Goleman, treats this granularity as a trainable skill, not a fixed trait. Older generations largely didn't have access to this framework. They were handed blunt emotional tools: yell, shut down, or leave the room. Younger generations are increasingly working with a more precise emotional toolkit. Not perfect, but more precise. The internet didn't create emotional sensitivity, but it gave sensitive people something they'd rarely had before: a mirror and a community. Aron's research on HSP individuals identified a cluster of adaptive advantages that come bundled with the same trait that causes emotional flooding: heightened creativity, deeper empathy, richer processing of complex information, the sensitivity that makes you cry. Mid-argument is the same sensitivity that makes you notice things other people miss. The same antenna that overwhelms you is the one that picks up signals others can't receive. Neuroplasticity research confirms that emotional regulation isn't a fixed factory setting. The nervous system rewires through practice, through learning to name feelings earlier, through somatic techniques that interrupt the flooding cycle before it peaks, through simply understanding the mechanism well enough to meet it with curiosity instead of shame, and that last part, the understanding, might be the most powerful intervention of all. If you cry when you're angry, your nervous system is not broken. It is thorough. It processes threat so completely, so deeply, that the pressure has to go somewhere, and it chooses tears over explosion. William Frey's research told us those tears carry real biochemical weight. Aron's research told us the people who flood fastest often feel most accurately. Goleman told us the hijack isn't personal. It's architectural. You're not too sensitive for the world. The world just hasn't caught up to how you process it. The goal isn't to stop crying when you're angry. The goal is to stop being ashamed of it and start getting curious about what your body already knows. If this video describes something you've never had words for before, drop it in the comments, because I guarantee you're not alone in that. And if someone in your life needs to hear this, send it to them. It might start a conversation worth having.